10th meeting of the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell. It's good to see such a large crowd here tonight. I'd like to invite the Centennial Environmental Club students to come forward and lead us in the pledge. If we'd all stand and face the flag. Got to come forward. Here's the microphone. Or, that works too.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, what is the occasion for us to be honored with the presence of the Centennial Environmental Club?
The students at Centennial High School have done a tremendous job in the Roswell community. They have included their entire student population in educating about the environment. And in addition, they've been out in the community at the Nature Center and local festivals, have participated in a lot of community events, and we're just very proud of the work that they have done.
And we are also proud of Centennial High and the students in the Environmental Club. Let's have a hand for these students. Now, I make the Boy Scouts say something, so if I could have the two students address us. And we typically begin by introducing ourselves.
All right, I'm Corey Eckert, and a few things that we've done is we've hosted
it's tough when you get up there.
Yeah. Three of the officers are still out on Holcomb Bridge Road trying to find us. So.
We've done frequent river cleanups of the Chattahoochee River.
Thank you.
And we constantly do every football game. We recycle.
I've been there, and I've seen y'all recycling, and I appreciate it.
We even had, what was the person from that did the balloon?
Laura Akins.
We even had a lady named Laura Akins. She came in, brought a big, huge inflatable Earth to educate our students about Earth Day.
You want to pass it off to your compatriot up there?
I'm Jared Cohen, and I'm the historian this year and treasurer next year of the Environmental Club. We also participate in locker cleanouts. We help recycle a bunch of the notebooks and things that students throw away a lot of the time. The East Roswell, or not East Roswell, Snake Thing and stuff. Chattahoochee Nature Center, they send a lot of representatives over to teach us about snakes and opossums, hawks, a lot of animals, and yeah, just teach us about camping and stuff like that. So it's good.
Thank you for all that you do. I encourage y'all to stay involved. I know we've got lots of cleanups that you've helped us in the past, and I hope you'll participate in the future. The next event, I know it's not necessarily an environmental, specifically environmental. We've got the Back to the Chattahoochee River race coming up, and I hope that you will send a group down there to race in that event. It's always fun. It's good to have you here tonight. One more hand for Centennial High. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
We have someone else coming. You made it just in time.
Our lost students are found.
Do you want to introduce these other students?
Yes. This is our president, Bree Earl, and vice president, Amelia Lee, and Ashlyn Yearwood. And these are 5 of our almost 65 members of our club.
Well, Bree, anything, I know you don't know what's going on before you arrive, but anything you'd like to close with?
I'm very, okay. I'm very thankful for having the opportunity to be involved in such a great club through 3 years and being able to help start it and recruit members. And I have a lot of fond memories from this club. So.
Thank you for serving, Bree. One more hand for our president of this club.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. The And y'all can go out and pick up trash now if you want to return home. Thank you. Recycle things. Good to have you here tonight. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Councilmember Wynn. Do we have a second? Second by Councilman Orleans. Does anyone have any questions regarding the consent agenda? All in favor raise their hands. Passes unanimously. This time we'd like to recognize our police, beginning with a proclamation declaring this as Peace Officers Week. Peace Officers Memorial Day. Whereas the Congress and President of the United States have designated May 15th as Police Officers Memorial Day, and the week in which it falls as Police Week. And whereas the members of the law enforcement agencies of Roswell play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of the citizens of Roswell. And whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the problems, duties, and responsibilities of their police department, and that members of our police department recognize their duties to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, by protecting them against violence and disorder, and by protecting the innocents against deception and the weak against oppression and intimidation. And whereas the police department of Roswell has grown to be a modern and scientific law enforcement agency which unceasingly provides a vital public service, now therefore I, Jerry Wood, Mayor of the City of Roswell, call upon all the citizens of Roswell and upon all patriotic, civil, and educational organizations to observe the week of May 10th through May 16th, 2010 as Police Week, and encourage everyone to join in commemorating police officers past and present who by their faithful and loyal devotion to their responsibilities have rendered a dedicated service to their communities, and in doing so have established themselves an enviable and enduring reputation for preserving the rights and securities of all our citizens. And with that, I'd like our police officers, our two here tonight, stand up. Let's give them a hand. Chief Williams and our guard tonight. Thank you, gentlemen. And at this time, I'll call upon Nancy Diamond, the liaison to our police department, for further words.
Still getting used to the impromptu speeches. I was over there this afternoon at shift change and was fortunate to get to talk with a number of the officers. And as I told them, we don't need a week specifically to say this, but it certainly gives us an opportunity to express our gratitude for all they do and all they risk on our behalf. And we really appreciate our department in particular because they're exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, we'll move on to a presentation of the budget. We read the proclamation. Oh, there's another proclamation? Oh. Nope, that's it for proclamations. That's it.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
You may proceed. Go
Thanks,
ahead.
sir. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. We are here to present the proposed FY 2011 proposed budget. And as we begin the presentation, I wanted to go over what the guiding principles of the budget principles are in developing the budget. First, we are to present you with a balanced budget such that the revenues are greater than or equal to the operating expenses plus the maintenance capital. General fund use of reserves is for one-time capital and road repairs reconstruction. There will be no tax increase. We will maintain 25% of the general fund balance for operating expenditures and maintain the current level of service. And as we work through those principles, this slide will show you that we are presenting you with a balanced budget. Our revenues equal our proposed expenses for FY 2011. We will be proposing in terms of no tax increase, we are proposing a millage rate equivalent to last year's of 5.455 total mills. To provide you a history of your city's millage rate, in 2005 it was 6.087 mills. The proposed for FY 2011 is 5.455. To go through the 3 months, maintaining 3 months operating expenditures, our proposed expenditure budget is $55.9 million. 3 months operating would be $13.979 million. We currently have $27 million in fund balance. By policy, we are to retain $13.9 million. The reserve above policy is $13.28 million. To give you a history of the revenues for this city, in 2008 we collected $62 million in revenue. We are proposing next year's revenue collections will be $55.9 million. That's a decline of $6.4 million. This chart will provide you the use of reserves over that same period of time, from general fund, and then the use of transfers in the budget. So for FY10, we approved spending $9.4 million in reserves or one-time transfers. To give you a breakdown of how our revenues are received, the majority of our revenues are in sales tax and property tax. It's 19.6 for property and 18.2 for sales. The next largest item is the franchise and alcohol and business taxes. From those revenues, we develop an expenditure budget. We started with last year's budget of $55.89 million. We adjusted operating expenses by $2 million, personnel by $500,000, increased information technology by almost $51,000, and miscellaneous maintenance and operations by $763,000, for a general fund operating budget of $54.16 million. The next aspect to our general fund budget is the maintenance capital. We are proposing in FY 2011 for maintenance capital to be $1.756 million, for our total general fund budget of $55.916 million. And this just gives you a snapshot of our maintenance capital over the years from 2007 forward, and what we spent on an annual basis, or budgeted on an annual basis. As we move from the general fund, or still in general fund, this gives you an expenditure by department. You see the largest expenditures is public safety and recreation, fire $6.2 million, police $6.3, and parks and recreation is $10.1 million. To give you a history of that, how expenditures compare to revenues, the yellow would be revenues collected on an annual basis. The red on the bar graph would be the use of reserves or transfers. The green line chart identifies your expenses on an annual basis. And we'll move from general fund to all funds. And as you can see, general fund makes up the biggest part of the pie. But you see there's a lot of other activities that the city takes forth in, from confiscated assets to water and sewer fund to group benefits. We just wanted to give you an idea of all of our activities. And from those funds, we wanted to provide you a history of the source of funds, meaning the revenues and use of reserves, from 2008 through current. you'll see that in 2008 we had a total revenues of $134 million, and we're proposing $93 million for this fiscal year. And this is how these sources of funds come to the city. Again, the largest portion is property tax, sales tax, franchise tax, and then charges for services. And then this is how we spend those funds. The largest expenditure by the city is salaries and benefits, and then operating capital, interfund transfers, debt service, and then some contingency and deductions budgeting. As salaries and benefits is the largest portion of our budget, we would give you a graph of our staffing history. 2005, we had 610 employees. The 2011 proposed budget is 611 employees. And then we equate that to the population of the city using the U.S. Census data. You can see it's 7.16 in 2005. The proposed budget is 6.96 employees per 1,000 citizens. So as that is an overview of the proposed budget, I thought we would give you an outline of the remaining budget calendar. After this meeting, we have a work session. We have individual meetings scheduled for the remainder of the week. We have a work session next Tuesday, and then a work session scheduled on the 27th, and then budget reading and potential millage rate hearings for the 7th, 14th, and 21st of June. And just to give you an idea of what's next, it is the budget work session.
Now, we're going to have a budget work session for council to try to answer what questions you have tonight. I know you haven't had an opportunity to review this, but any questions for staff at this time? Yes, Mrs. Wynn.
Yeah, just a real short one, Keith. On the per capita on the employees, that's based on the 2000 census. So we really won't know the per capita until we get the census in. Am I correct?
This is estimates, and I think the last estimate was 2 years ago. So yes, it's not accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Simply
okay,
from their
thank
estimates.
Other questions? As the council knows, staff prepares a budget, presents it to me, and then gives me the opportunity to propose changes. I want to go over the three biggest changes to the budget as presented by staff, and they were in the fire department, the community development department, and the Rex and Park budget. In the fire department, we've added 3 battalion chiefs. These are the shift managers. We have 3 police shifts, and at this time, these are managed by part-time people, and it was the recommendation of Chief Spencer that we go to full-time management. I think there was a general consensus on council that it was the appropriate thing to do. To fill those 3 positions, we're budgeting $295,500 to add 3 full-time shift battalion chiefs. The next department we made changes to is in the community development department. Well, as everyone knows, construction is down substantially all across the nation. It's been trending down for the last couple of years, and I don't expect it to return to the level it was in the peak of 2006 for many years to come. With a fall in the construction, there's also a fall in the demand for construction services, which community development provides. So we are, and just to give you an idea of what we've experienced in demands, this is a chart. Building inspections down from the peak of 2006 by 45%. Inspections per employee down 32%. New commercial permits down 77%. New homes down 75%. Annual land disturbance permits 40% down. To our boards, their business is way down. Board of Zoning Appeals is hearing 59% less appeals. Design Review Board is hearing 59% less petitions. The one difference here is Historic Preservation Commission is actually up by 27%. Planning Commission, this is rezoning primarily, they're down by 65%. This isn't directly related to construction, but our code enforcement is also down by the calls for service are down by 5.2%, and the calls for service per employee is down by 36%. So we've seen a substantial decline in construction and the demand for services, a decline which I don't expect to return for some time. So therefore, go to the next slide, I'm proposing a reduction in the Community Development Department of 30%. Now this would be a transition year. That 30% from the peak of 2009 would result in a cost savings ultimately in 2012 of $668,000. Because there's a transition into that period, we're budgeting a cost savings in this current budget year, if this is passed, of $453,000. So that is a big change. And the last department that I propose to change to, you can go ahead and skip over this one, was in our Rec and Parks department. Rec and Parks had requested maintenance capital of $250,000. Originally it had funded $75,000. I think it was underfunded. So I am adding $175,000 into the Rec and Parks maintenance budget. The money is coming from the same department, 150. We're adding 150 into the, well, we changed that. I'm looking at a different sheet. Adding $150,000 into the maintenance budget. If you go to the next slide, this money is coming from the rec participation fee. We're making two changes. One doesn't show here. We're taking $80,000 out of that department, what was being funded from rec participation fees for special events like Youth Day Parade. I felt we should really be handling it like that we are our other special events and moving into the general fund budget. So we're taking that burden out of the rec participation fund. But the other thing we're doing in the rec participation fund is we're taking, go to that next, the rec participation fund.
This one or this one?
No, the next one. The other one you showed. No.
These are the three.
It's the subsidy slide. Nope. Rec and Park subsidy. We subsidize our Recs and Parks program. This is for the adults, the seniors, and the youth. Almost $1 million. That's above what they pay for the rec programs. Of that, I've categorized this into the youth programs, adult programs, and the senior programs. In the adult program, that subsidy works out to $139,000. So if I'm not considered a senior, and some folks do consider me a senior, but if I'm treated as an adult in those programs, the taxpayer, if I play touch football, is putting money into that program so I can play touch football. Under these times and the need for recreation, I don't believe we should be subsidizing that. So that's $139,000 we're subsidizing. Folks in Roswell, I think, can afford to pay their own way. So I'm taking $150,000 out of the Rec and Parks subsidy and moving that to the Rec and Parks maintenance program. The Rec and Park budget will actually remain the same, but we're shifting it from program subsidies to maintenance. And those are the three big changes I'm making. And with that, I'll be willing to answer y'all's questions when we get to work session. Any immediate questions y'all have? Detailed questions, I'd like to hold a work session. Thank you. With that, we'll call upon Council Member Betty Price.
First item under community development is CU 10-01, 1327 Holcomb Bridge Road, North Fulton Land Acquisition LLC, and that's for a conditional use rezoning. Brad Townsend will describe that.
Thank you. This is a conditional use request to allow for a used car dealership at 1327 Holcomb Bridge Road. It's located directly east of 400 on the south side of Holcomb Bridge. It is surrounded by commercial development. It was an existing bank building that has been used by a auto used car dealer in the past. As required by the changes to our code, any used car dealer in the C3 zoning district is required to be approved as a conditional use by the mayor and council if it is accepted and meets the criteria. Those criteria being over 3/4 of an acre in size, having a main building on the piece of property. This property is a little over an acre in size and does have the existing main building and is zone C3. This application came before the Planning Commission. They recommended 2 additional conditions. Staff recommended approval at that time. These are the 6 conditions recommended by staff. Conditions 5 and 6 were recommended by the Planning Commission. You can see included in number 6, at the request of the Planning Commission, staff was to work with the applicant and define pre-owned luxury cars. Staff took the best stab it could in dealing with that definition. We included it in your backup material. This definition was reviewed by the applicant. We know it's not perfect, but it was an opportunity to at least meet the criteria requested by the Planning Commission, including the requirement that the used car dealer would only allow to be sale of pre-owned luxury vehicles. That is the recommendation by the Planning Commission, that those 6 conditions be included.
Does the council have any questions for staff? Councilmember Diamond.
Mr. Townsend, I saw in there was a neighborhood meeting scheduled before the Planning Commission, and I haven't seen any information on that. Is there?
There was no one in attendance at the meeting.
Councilmember Price.
Regarding the new definition of luxury vehicle, would that necessitate an addition in our ordinances?
That definition, if requested or included by council, could only be with this conditional use, and it could be included as part of the approval if council so choose to include it. Or could not be included. It is council's choice.
Councilmember DiPolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Based on an earlier conversation today with our other city attorney, he had concerns over this definition and its enforceability. So, Mr. Davison, can you elaborate on that?
We looked at this definition and gone over it about 20 different ways, trying to come up with something. And in my legal opinion, and also Mr. Halsey's, this is far too vague of a definition to withstand any kind of court challenge. We racked our brains trying to come up with an acceptable definition, and we haven't been able to come up with an acceptable definition of a luxury pre-owned vehicle. That's not to say there's not a good one out there somewhere. We just haven't been able to come up with one that we both feel would withstand any kind of challenge. It's a very subjective term in and of itself, luxury. Your luxury is going to be different than my luxury, which is going to be different than Mr. Townsend's luxury. So I would recommend not putting that condition in there if council likes to go forward with this.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend, was it the opinion of the Planning Commission that this was really a necessary condition in order to approve this zoning?
It was included as part of their motion of approval, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Townsend, how long is this property currently vacant?
Yes, it is, sir.
Do we know how long it has been vacant?
I believe the applicant can tell us. I know it's been months.
Over a year.
Over a year.
If you'll come forward, sir, and give us your name, and you'll have an opportunity to speak, but you can answer this question now.
My name is Dan DeCraney. I'm with Advanced Realty, and I've been associated with the property on the leasing of it for the last 7 years. And we had a tenant that was in there leasing high-end cars, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and they went out of business last...
So what time period were they in there?
They were in there for 1 year and had signed a 5-year lease and went out of business 14 months into the deal.
All right, and so how long has it been?
And that was March of 2009, so it's been vacant since that time.
All right, and prior to the that tenant who was in there, and for how long?
They were in there 14 months. Prior to that, we had AGN Auto Gallery, which was in there for 4 years. They wanted to buy the property, and we didn't want to sell, so they bought a building 2 doors up from this one.
So what business was AGN Auto Gallery in?
AGN, they sold Lexus, BMWs, and Mercedes.
So, and prior to that, do you recall?
Yeah. Good evening. My name is Teresa DeVoe, and I'm actually the applicant and represent the owners. Prior to AGN, AGN occupied the building from November 2004 until October of 2008. And just to back up, the current tenant didn't move out of the building, or the prior tenant, in March of 2009, but they stopped paying rent in December of 2008. So we've not had any income in the building since December of 2008. Now, to answer
so
your
is it
question,
fair to say
Mayor,
since 2004 the only use of this property has been
since 2004 the use has been
for
to a
auto
similar
sales or leasing?
Correct.
Thank you. Y'all may, unless there's some more questions for staff, with this time we'll hear from the applicant, and y'all are sort of stay on up there.
Okay.
Anything you'd like to add? Any
Yes, please.
This is your opportunity.
Okay. Well, again, my name is Teresa DeVoe, and this is Dan DeCraney, and I represent the applicant and the ownership of the property. And Dan has worked with us for many years in handling the leasing and negotiations with prospective occupants of the property. We're here to ask for your approval of conditional use zoning. The property is zoned for commercial uses, but in May of 2008, an ordinance was passed that the use for sales of pre-owned cars must receive conditional use. At that time, we had an occupant in the property that was selling pre-owned cars, so we were allowed to continue operating. And frankly, didn't know about the change, so when they vacated and then we went out to market the property, and a tenant that had signed a lease was actually doing business here in the city of Roswell at another location, leased the property. We signed a lease when they went in to apply for their building or their occupational permit to move from one Roswell location to another. That's when we learned. So we had to stop and back up and begin the process with the help of the staff. In summary, the property is a small building. It's located at 1327, as Mr. Townsend showed you, Holcomb Bridge Road. It does sit on 1.07 acres and has a building size of 3,969 square feet. It's surrounded by a variety of commercial uses, including a bank, Kings Landing Shopping Center, a hotel, and on the corner at Holcomb Bridge Road and 400, just to the west of us, is a gasoline station that has been vacant for numerous years. We've worked with the staff. We did attend the neighborhood meeting that was held, but there were no neighbors there, but we were in attendance. And then we met with the Planning Commission and both the staff and Planning Commission have recommended approval based on the conditions. We were very agreeable to working with the staff and coming up with an acceptable form of definitions or whatever we need to do to meet the conditions as requested. I was going to share with you the timeline, but you've asked about that. We purchased the property in August of 2001, and it was occupied by a doctor until 2004. And then since that time, when it has been occupied, it has been leased to a reseller of used automobiles. The building has been vacant since March of 2009. We've received no rent since December of 2008. And I know what we're asking for is allowed under the zoning for conditional use, but we're also asking for some flexibility because during these economic times it has been very difficult to find tenants for the property. We did enter into a lease with Auto House Web. This is the tenant that I just mentioned that was located within the city of Roswell. They had been in the city of Roswell for more than 6 years. And unfortunately, as we were coming into the Planning Commission meeting, we were informed by that tenant that they no longer were desirous of staying with us because they were losing business and they had to continue their operations. So they were seeking another location outside of the city of Roswell. But we wanted to continue to move forward. And I'm going to ask Dan to speak for a minute sort of about the rationale for that decision because of the nature of the property, the location, and the highest and best use kind of drive the calls that we get.
Okay. As I said, I've been involved with the property for many years. When AGN Auto Gallery was there, I mean, the rent was $6,700 a month. As you know, the building's 4,000 square feet, so that's some pretty good rent. Plus, the tenant pays all the expenses on top of that, the taxes, insurance. It's a very specialized building. There's a vault inside there because, again, it used to be a bank building. Office tenants are not interested in that building just because it is just too high price for them to afford that. So we're looking for really a retail-type tenant to help us out. When the tenant went out of business last March, we have slowly dropped the rent. We've had some issues with things being stolen out there. The air conditioners have been stolen while the building's been vacant, broken windows. We finally dropped the rent down to $4,700 a month and attracted this Auto House Web, which signed a lease back in January, and it said, here it is May, and they just did not want to go through the process. I mean, there's 2 owners of that company, and they have kids in college, and they just couldn't be out of business 5 months when they thought they were meeting all the ramifications there. Just in the last month or so, we've put the sign back up to start marketing. Again, I've attracted high-end auto used car sales and a Title Max. And so I don't know if that's the direction we need to go or what, but the people that can afford to pay the rent are in the retail type business, and again, it's a very specialized type property.
Does the council have any questions for the applicant? Anything else you wish to add? Councilmember Price.
I just wanted to ask you if you have reviewed the conditions recommended by the Planning Commission and staff, and if those are acceptable to you.
Yes, we reviewed them, and we're agreeable to working with those.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you. Mr. DeCraney, during the Planning Commission, you stated that you had interest from medical clients, dental clients, so you've had other clients come in to want to rent this building, but you're still holding out for a conditional use with this very restrictive. Can you explain to me why that you're not going with those people?
Well, the medical and the dental folks that have called have wanted long-term leases, and we just did not want to tie in the buildings into long-term leases with low rates. I mean, it just doesn't, for the long-term usage of the property, it just doesn't bode well. Those tenants have to spend a bunch of money, obviously, on the property to plumb it because it's not plumbed, okay, or do anything else to move walls. And as I said, they don't want to do that for a short-term lease. I mean, we're looking, the most we want to go out is 5 years, which is pretty good in these times right now, but we just haven't wanted to sign a 10-year lease and lock us into a real low rate.
Okay, and Ms. DeVoe, at the same Planning Commission, you lamented about having too many restrictions on this property because you thought that that would continue to reduce the value of the asset. And if you go with these restrictions, that's it. And could you explain to me what you meant by you wanted flexibility on this zoning?
Okay, first let me address the first point. I believe that when I stated the restrictions were that not allowing us to have conditional use restricts our ability to go out into the marketplace and market the property to users who have indicated to us by listening to the market that that's the highest and best use for the property. So the restrictions that I'm referring to are the restriction of not being able to lease to a used automobile dealership. Okay, and your second question was?
You said that you wanted flexibility on the zoning.
Yes, and which is flexibility meaning approval of conditional use. We're asking for you to be flexible with us.
That's not being clear to me, because conditional use is one use and one use only.
That's correct.
And that's a used car lot.
Okay.
Plus, you have also agreed to have it restricted even more to luxury cars.
Because we felt that the Planning Commission asked us to do that. We were agreeable to working within that.
I'm still trying to figure out what you're talking about. You want flexibility on the conditional use. If you could be just a little bit more clear for me, please.
I meant flexibility within the zoning. And approving conditional use gives us that flexibility to lease to a used automobile dealership. It's within the allowed zoning of conditional use.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I think the confusion is can the applicant use the property for anything other than a conditional use that they're requesting, which is a question for staff.
And that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking to be allowed to use it for what we're requesting.
Only.
Or what's allowed under regular zoning.
Well, see, that's where I think we're getting the confusion. Mr. Townsend, my understanding is this. If this is approved for conditional use, that is the only use that can be, that can be used on this property unless they come back and have that conditional use removed.
That wouldn't be my understanding, no.
Well, that's the interpretation I got from community development this afternoon. Or from, my understanding is if it's conditional to a use, which would be a used car lot, that is the only thing that can be used for.
Well, let's get a clarification. Mrs. Wakefield, why don't you have a discussion, Brad, because I know we're getting two different interpretations here. Let's see if we can have one interpretation.
Here, basically my response was that in previous positions that I have had, when a conditional use was applied to a property, that was the use in which that property was tied to. I did say, however, that needed to be verified through the legal department, because when we had a meeting with the legal department, there was an indication that you could use the underlying zoning. But as I said, my previous experience has been once you have a use permit, it's pretty much tied to that use permit until it's removed.
If I may, it's basically you're going to approve, if you approve this plan, it will be subject to a site plan. And in order for another use to come in, they're going to have a different site plan. And in Roswell, to change your site plan, you have to go through the whole process. So it basically would have to come back in for a change to the site plan.
If they didn't have to change the site plan, though, they wouldn't have to come back in.
Correct. If they didn't have to change it at all.
The site plan which worked for the used car dealer might work for a rocket scientist, and he says that's fine. If he doesn't need a change in the site plan, he's okay.
Well, that's my understanding, because we meet the size requirements for consideration of conditional use. I mean, we've gone through it all with staff, and we meet all of the conditions. So I don't know how to answer your question, because I don't interpret your zoning, but that's not the impression or indications that we have been given to this very moment.
Other questions? Nancy Diamond.
It looks to me like the consensus on the Planning Commission was that the one thing that made this comfortable to them was the luxury zoning definition. And if we're hung up on that, I don't know how we can cross one without the other. You guys have done this before, and I haven't, but that seems like a pertinent problem.
Other questions? If I'm going to give the public an opportunity to comment, and if there's any rebuttal you'd like to make, you can rebut any comments they make, but not put any new information in, unless it's rebuttal. All right. Does anyone in the audience wish to comment? Any questions or comments from the floor? Yes, sir. Come forward, please.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Bob Argros. I'm at 434 Teal Court in Roswell, Georgia. I'm also the Development Chair, Community Development Chair for Martin's Landing the residential community. I have some issues with the fact that we want to do a restrictive amendment for zoning for C3 property. What's wrong with the C3 property? In addition to that, we already have a used car lot right on the same street, right next door to it. We can't evaluate what's a luxury car, obviously, from what you folks are saying. There is no tenant to occupy that property now, at least that's my understanding. According to the developer, he's had other offers, and the problem with that was long-term leases. I don't think that the city has any problem with a long-term lease, particularly if it's locked in with something good for us. They've had 3 tenants there who were, in fact, is this on? Okay, thank you. 3 tenants who were, in fact, used car dealers, some of them luxury cars, and they haven't made it. I don't know why we think this zoning will change that. We have 35 car lots now in Roswell, so I'm told by staff, and that seems to be a sufficiency of used car lots. I did attend the Planning Commission, and it was clear to me that they wanted to restrict the zoning there based upon the luxury cars. And therefore I have to oppose it. Thank you.
If this council restricted it to luxury cars and the petitioner was comfortable with luxury cars, would you support this?
I don't see any reason for us to lock in a restriction like luxury cars or any other kind of cars there.
So your opposition is to any used cars?
Well, it's leaving it to C3 is what I'm for, not for restricting it. But with just a car lot, no.
So here's the question. This is not restricting it to just used cars. It's expanding the use to allow used cars in addition to other uses. So, as I understand it, this would not prohibit them from leasing it to a diamond dealer. It would simply allow another use. I'm just trying to get your position. So are you opposed to used cars? Are you opposed to used cars other than luxury used cars? Or are you opposed to any used car?
Well, actually, I'm opposed to more used cars. Well, now, whether or not the foundation is opposed to any more used cars, I don't know the answer to that question. I know that we voted in favor of the C3 zoning, and that's what we need to stay with.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to comment? Well, before we go, Mrs. Price, I want to just make sure we didn't have anybody from the floor. I see no questions from the floor. Any response from the applicant? And again, unless you had a question. Do you have a question for Mr. Argroves?
I think a pertinent question.
Is that for Mr. Argroves?
Oh, no. Well, for anybody, just throwing this out. With these conditions that are being recommended by Planning Commission and staff, this would actually enhance the property. Is that not correct? The sidewalk improvements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That is correct.
So if we left it as just a regular C3, none of these things would be required to be
correct
improvements to the property.
That's correct.
So actually, we would end up with a better property because you had agreed to these conditions.
That is correct. In fact, we're improving the public sidewalks.
Thank you.
All right, this isn't time for debate if that's what y'all want to do. I'm just trying to get questions on the floor. Other questions before we hear the final words from the applicant? Your closing words.
Okay. Well, I'd like to address a few of the comments and have some response to those. First of all, the comment was made that there were offers made and they were denied. They were not offers. There were phone calls made and inquiries. That's very different than getting somebody who can come in and actually sit down, view the property, and sign a lease. So we never got to the point where we had any offers of a doctor. We had offers from a jewelry store. We tried very hard. And frankly, the reason it didn't work was we had some credit concerns. The owners of this property are very concerned about having a credit-worthy business in the building. That leads to the used automobile dealerships. The most recent one did have financial problems and failed. The one prior to that did not fail. In fact, they were so successful, they bought the building 3 doors down. So they're still in the neighborhood because it's a very viable location for that type of business. And also, if we're restricted to having to continue to reduce our rents, I just sat here and watched the budget presentation where more than 50% of your revenues come from property taxes, and we're continuing to have decreasing valuation, and that's what I alluded to in my comments to the Planning Commission. That's it. Dan?
As I said, we really tried to work out with a deal with a jeweler who is over in North Point right now, wanted to expand into that site. We worked on that deal for 4 or 5 months, and he just did not want to pull the plug to move over there and pay a whole lot more rent than his little 1,200 square foot shop that's over there on North Point Parkway. So, yeah, right, he couldn't afford it.
Thank you. Does the council have any last questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, this time we'll entertain discussion before we entertain a motion. Any comments council would like before we entertain a motion? Councilmember Diamond.
I wasn't here for the discussion in May of '08 when we put this ordinance into place. Can you clarify for me the intent behind it? And because my understanding is without that ordinance, the C3 would have allowed this to happen without this discussion, right? So what was the reasoning behind that?
Well, there's 7.
Everybody's grimacing.
And typically you have 7 reasons, but I'll be glad to
I've
entertain
obviously
some of
called out the elephant in the room.
If the council wishes to give those, anybody wish to volunteer the reason that they voted for?
Sure, and I think I was the one that was pushing that, so I'll go along with it. But the problem was, as we looked to redevelopment, which is what we've all been focused on, that the primary area right now for used car dealers is along the section of Alpharetta Highway, Highway 9, that we are wanting to redevelop. And with as many of those that there are, that just really causes a lot of problems for that whole area. And the large number of those in close proximity was something we decided we wanted to try and deal with. So the focus was on that area, which is why the acreage was set at 3/4 of an acre at that point, because that's what most of those were in that area. But we did also look at this area here because, again, I think over time we want to look at that for redevelopment, and that is an area that people are going to be coming in and do currently come into Roswell from right there. And honestly, on this particular one, with the luxury side, helps that side, but still, to have a whole row of used car dealers is not really conducive to long-term redevelopment. So that was the effort specific to Alpharetta Highway, and you didn't want to do just 1 or 2 properties. You wanted to cover the entire ordinance or the entire city. So that's where that became a conditional use for any property using that would sell used cars, if that helps. But that was the primary goal, was looking at the longer term aspects of redevelopment, and the feeling, at least mine and I guess others as well, that having used car dealers up and down Alpharetta Highway was not conducive to redevelopment, and it was also not what we wanted that area to be.
Anyone else wish to volunteer justification? Councilmember Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's one reason I voted for it. It's just not because of Alpharetta Highway, but because at the time of that vote, there was 2 used car dealerships on Holcomb Bridge, AGN, and then the one that failed, the one that they want to do the conditional use. And I think what was happening is that because the used cars were part of C3 and there was no community input about having used cars in those areas because it was allowable, that's, I think, another reason that Councilman Eichelhart passed this. And again, my concern was we already had 2 on Holcomb Bridge and we could have had more, and that, I think, is going to hinder our redevelopment in that type of area. So that's how come I voted for the conditional use. Because we really have to, it's not having a building occupied, it's what's going to be good for that area and what kind of business that should go in that place.
Councilmember DiPolito.
I think those points hold true for Holcomb Bridge Road as well, because Kings Market obviously is in need of redevelopment. The adjacent property, we've seen redevelopment proposals for that property as well. So this area in particular is an area that we really need to encourage redevelopment, and it's in my opinion that a used car lot doesn't help in that effort. In fact, there's probably very few uses that actually would find a used car lot as a complementary use next door. Other car lots, maybe a gas station, maybe an auto parts store, but none of those types of uses are really what we want when we're looking at redevelopment. So as much as I am sympathetic to the economic environment, and I truly understand what that is like, I think we need to look toward the long term and not do anything short term that will impair our ability to redevelopment in the future.
Mrs. Wakefield, I've got a question. Redevelopment's been discussed a lot. What are we doing to encourage redevelopment? Specifically, we're doing to encourage redevelopment on this site and the adjacent sites. And what do we have in the works?
Probably the most significant thing for this area is the fact that it's included in the opportunity zone boundary. So that will open the doors for development to come in because they will be able to receive the tax credit. Also, it's an area that would be prime for redevelopment when the city looks at the possibility of establishing incentives like TADs. As far as actively marketing this area, that's not something that the staff is doing or is in a position to do. However, we work closely with the property owner of King's Market and talk to him about different options for the property. And so that's basically kind of where we are in this area. This is an area that we have identified as part of the upcoming comprehensive plan as a character area that will require special attention.
Thank you, Ms. Wakefield. Any other questions or comments before we entertain a motion? Do we have a motion?
I move to approve CU 10-01 with all staff conditions placed upon that, all 6 staff conditions.
Motion by Councilmember Price to approve with staff conditions. Do we have a second? Motion fails for lack of a second.
I'll second it for discussion purposes.
We have a second. We have a motion by Councilmember Price, a second by Councilmember Orleans. We will entertain further discussion. I've heard from a lot of folks to the left of me and one folk to the right of me. And I've got the 2 folks at the far end are the ones who seem to be the quietest on this so far. So, but Mrs. Price, I'll let her speak next.
Well, not having been here in 2008, I can only appreciate the discussions and the determination at that time. I think the economy has changed a lot since then, and certainly in this situation when this first came up, when they requested this conditional use, it was a bit of a confusion, I think, overall, having not known that this had occurred, that condition placed on the property, and then when they rented it out to this other entity from Alpharetta Highway, it actually improved, in some minds, the scene on Alpharetta Highway, but it, in effect, was a net zero of used car dealerships, into the city, since it was just moving from one place to the other. But in the interim, obviously, with all this delay and discussion, that entity has moved to Sandy Springs. So I think really we have lost a quality business to the adjacent city, and now the property sits vacant. And I don't think that's what we should be doing as a council, sending businesses to the neighboring town so that we can have a vacancy in a property where the owner is willing to upgrade the property as long as they can rent it to the person of their choice. And they've expressed their desire not to enter into a long-term lease, which I think is wise in this economic climate, since that would put them in a position to sell or be part of any redevelopment in the future. So I think they have wisely exhibited their flexibility to what may be coming along down the road, but in the interim, I think that the use of this property as they're desiring to have that additional condition, I think is not unreasonable and certainly wise on their part.
Further discussion. Councilmember Eichelhardt, did you wish to comment?
Yes, please. This spoke, since my specific comment was about the past, and honestly, this is a tough one because I agree with many of the comments that Councilmember Price made, that you guys are trying to have an ongoing concern there and take care of the property, but I also have a larger concern, as Mr. DiPolito said, for the long term, that we could probably allow any kind of business in any place in here and have a whole row of things that just is not going to be conducive to our long-term health of the city, and specifically the luxury, car, even as a used car, is probably a better use than many. So again, I'm torn on that. But when the first one went up, that concerned me, and then they moved down the street, and then we have the second one come through, it has a greater concern, and then that overall impact of having two, and then technically you could call the one down the street at least a rental. It sets a bad trend for what the city could be. So I can't support it as much as I'm torn on, wanting to help out our property owner here. But I think the longer term, I can't support it.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Diamond.
I guess we're still, the luxury car issue is still hanging out there. Are we putting that in, or are we not putting that in?
The motion is made, and it would include the luxury car condition, and the applicant has indicated they would accept the luxury car condition, which mitigates Mr. Davidson's concern. So, other questions? Other discussion before we take a vote? Seeing no hands up, all in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Councilman Orleans, do you want to comment before, or was that a vote? It was kind of tentative.
Well, you were turning the other way, so I was waiting for you to turn back. Everybody was expressing their opinions about why we passed this ordinance to begin with for conditional approval. And I think we all hit the same nail on the head. Basically, we were trying to stop the proliferation of these small, quickie used car lots that would just jump into any kind of business at all. So we designed certain criteria and certain minimums for them to follow, including acreage, including landscaping, and so forth. So while we don't want a lot of used cars around, I have a problem on not making it available in this particular site, because they are improving the property. They are meeting the criteria which we just outlined and we just passed within the last approximately year. We've got an empty building sitting there, so would we rather see a Title Max? Would we rather see broken windows? It is, and I agree with Councilman DiPolito on where it's located. So looking at this particular site, it's next to an empty gas station. It's across the street from a gas station. It's got a used car lot 3 doors over, which is very viable and doing good business and used to be in this spot. So while I wouldn't necessarily approve in any spot, and coming right off of 400, and with the fact that we've had used car businesses in here since I forget what it was, 03 or 04, as viable businesses, except for one. I've got to support the motion on this one. It's a difficult one, but I've got to go along with supporting the motion on it. Anyone else wish to comment before we take a vote? Councilmember DiPolito.
I'd like to point out that the criteria is criteria to be allowed to come in for a conditional use. That's not criteria to evaluate whether it is should be accepted or not. If you don't meet the criteria, you're not even allowed to come in as a conditional use. So that's really a minimum. That's not that does not set a standard. Also wanted to point out that there are some of those less desirable uses adjacent, but do we want to compound a problem that we already have? Because we already have an issue there. So do we want to make it worse, or do we want to try to set a tone to make it a more productive environment.
Councilmember Diamond.
This may be a question. If this is not approved and the Title Max is an option, is that something that is available within the zoning that it presently has?
Yes.
Title max would be, they could put a title max in.
Yes.
Councilmember Price, as
When?
currently zoned, they can put a title max in.
Yes.
Councilmember Wynn.
But my understanding too, Mr. Townsend, that all we're doing is giving them one more usage out of the C3. And if the title max comes in before a luxury pre-owned place comes in, we can still have a title max. Am I correct?
Yes.
So this conditional use only gives them one more use out of numerous C3s. And so I'm just, again, I think that's not an argument, and it's empty. They don't have a user right now. This is no user, no tenant, so it's going to stay vacant until they find out who they want to put in. And I still think, and I agree with Councilman DePolito and Councilman Eichelhart, we have to look at the long-term effect of what we're going to be doing here, especially since we just got the opportunity zone, and this is part of it. So I will not be supporting this.
Councilmember DePolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a question about the pawn title issue. I thought with the last ordinance change, there wasn't any opportunity except for one location in the city on the west side.
There's now a separation requirement, so we would have to look at that. I don't know where the closest existing one currently is, so there's probably would have to be a separation of.
So your statement that it's an allowable use may not actually be true.
The statement that it would be allowed under current C3 is accurate. What we would have to look at it, what did we provide for in the separation requirement? I think we put a 5,000 foot separation between existing title places.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to comment before we take a vote? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Councilman Orleans, Councilman Price, Councilman Diamond, all opposed. Councilman DePolito, Councilman Wynn, and Councilman Eichelhart. Well, the tone we're setting right now is a vacant building that has been built vacant for 14 months. That's not a good tone. I've heard that we want to try to set a tone for redevelopment. We do have an opportunity zone. I hope that will encourage things, but I don't think in the current economic environment, I don't expect to see redevelopment in this area for next 2 or 3 years if we're lucky. I hate to see this property say vacant to try to set a tone for redevelopment that seems to be many years off. And so I think although a car dealership may not be, even as luxury cars, which I think mitigates this, may not be the best tone that we could have, it's a better tone than broken windows and vacant property. And therefore, I'm going to cast my vote in favor of the conditional zoning. So it passes 4-3.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I do have a question, and I know it's already passed. But since legal says that the definition that we just passed is unenforceable, I think that's going to be a big problem right there.
Thank you for those comments. And at this time, Mrs. Price, you can call the next agenda item.
The next item is RZ 10-03, text amendment regarding real estate directional signs for agent caravans, and this is the first reading. Mr. Townsend.
This is a first reading for the text amendment to allow for real estate caravan signs. We're adding this section to the section 2212 dealing with temporary signs. B, which deals with real estate, we're adding a particular section which allows for real estate caravan signs to be placed between the time of 6 p.m. on Monday and to be removed by 5 p.m. on Tuesday. Planning Commission recommended approval of this proposed text amendment. Staff would recommend approval of the first reading of this text amendment.
Does the council have any questions for Mr. Townsend? Mr. Davidson, would you read the ordinance?
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the City of Roswell zoning ordinance regarding real estate directional signs within the city limits of Roswell. Now therefore, pursuant to their authority, the mayor and city council adopt the following ordinance. Zoning ordinance of the City of Roswell is hereby amended by adding new section to Chapter 22 of the City of Roswell zoning ordinance, Section 22.12B10, as follows. The text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this will be the first reading.
Does the council have any questions about the ordinance? Do we have a motion?
Yes, move to approve RZ 10-03 text amendment regarding real estate directional signs for agent caravans as presented and read.
Motion for approval by Councilmember Price. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember DiPolito. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
The next item, RZ 10-04, text amendment regarding companion animals, has been deferred to June 14th. Do we need to address it at this time?
Is there anyone here tonight on the companion animals? If so, we'll give you an opportunity to be heard. You'll have another opportunity to be heard when it comes back up again. So is anyone here tonight to have any questions or comments from the public about the companion animals, which is miscellaneous pets? Does anybody have any objection to a deferral? We have a motion to defer.
So moved.
Motion for deferral by Councilmember Price. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Orleans. All in favor of the motion? Yes.
What is the reason for the deferral?
The Planning Commission have requested some further research to be done, and it's being brought back to them. They did not make a motion on the proposed text amendment at their last Planning Commission meeting, so it's going back to them for further discussion.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
The next item is approval of a request by Lehigh Properties to rename Renee Court and Jessica Walk. Alice Wakefield will present this.
The property
Good
owner,
to see somebody in favor of renaming the street.
Lehigh Properties, has requested to change Renee Court to Canton Walk and to change Jessica Walk to Kemp Avenue. This request involves two property owners, and we've received the approval for the road name change from both property owners, and staff's recommendations approval.
Does the council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Wynn.
Ms. Wakefield, I'm assuming we've run this by public safety and we have no issues about like or sounding alike or anything like that, so we don't have to come back 6 months later and say, no problem.
We have.
Okay, great. No, is that a no that you haven't, or no problem, Chief?
The change is Renee Court to Canton Walk and Jessica Walk to Kemp Avenue.
I just want to make sure whatever we're changing, we're not going to have the same problem that we're dealing with now.
This is within a new development that has not been constructed.
I'd just like to make sure that public safety is okay with it.
Yes.
Any other questions? Councilmember Price.
I'd just like to clarify that the residents or owners, anyone affected who actually resides on those streets is in agreement?
There are only two property owners, and they both are in agreement. This is Mr. Walsh. He owns Lehigh Properties, which is the developments with the smaller townhomes.
I'm also a resident, too, and I am nuts for changing the street from mailing address standpoint. We've been through 3 of the address changes. We've ran it through the fire department. Original request was for Atwood and Camp Avenue. It has historical significance with the book Providence, Jane Atwood, and George Camp, and the fire department. Atwood sounded too much like another street, so then we changed our request from Atwood and shuffled around a little bit to call it something that didn't resemble other names in the community, presenting a hazard.
Councilmember DiPolito.
Just out of curiosity, did you not like Renee Court and Jessica Walk?
I really did it for 2 reasons. One is we have a historical theme going on in the neighborhood. The book Providence, which was published from a family member, is giving us we're highlighting the name George Camp, who was a resident here of Roswell in the 1800s, and his wife, Jane Atwood. We have neat little things through the neighborhood representing them, so I was trying to make it more historical significant and just a little more interesting than names of previous developers' children.
Well, you're doing a great job with the project.
Thanks.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks. It's been successful.
Any other discussion? Do we have a motion? Yes, Councilmember Price.
I move to approve the name change of Renee Court to Canton Walk and the name change from Jessica Walk to Camp Avenue.
Motion by Councilmember Price to change the names. Do we have a second? Second by Councilmember DiPolito. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Any further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
This time we'll hear from our city attorney.
I just have a recommendation for closure to discuss the acquisition of real estate.
All in favor of that motion, raise their hands. Motion by Councilman Eichelhart, second by the council. All in favor, raise their hands again. Passes. We have a work session in room 220 to talk